Welcome to biology. In this video we are going to review the steps of photosynthesis. Now first, before we get started, let's remember that photosynthesis takes place inside of the organelle called the chloroplast. Now the chloroplast is made up of a few components. The chloroplast has an outer and inner membrane. And we can see them outer membrane around the outside, and that inner membrane is just inside of the outer membrane. The chloroplast also has these structures inside of it that look like little pancakes. Each of these pancakes is called a thylakoid. Once we have a bunch of thylakoids stacked together, we call that stack of thylakoids a grana. And you can see that in this structure here in the back of the image. Now inside of each of the thylakoids is an open space, and that open space is called the lumen. Additionally, outside of the thylakoid, there is some open space in the chloroplast, and that open space is called the stroma. Now, each of these regions of the chloroplast have different functions. And remember that grana is a stack of thylakoids, the lumen is that space inside of the thylakoids. But I want to point out the specific functions of the stroma and the thylakoid itself. So the thylakoid is the location of the light-dependent reactions, or the light reactions. And the stroma is the location of the light-independent reactions, which are also called the dark reactions or the Kelvin cycle. So make sure that in your notes you have these structures labeled and you know the difference between the light-independent and light-dependent reaction location inside of the chloroplast. Now let's dive in a little deeper to the process of photosynthesis. Let's remember the equation for photosynthesis. We start with 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. We add in 6 molecules of water, and we add in a little bit of sunlight. These are all of our reactants, and they combine together through a series of steps to produce our products, which would be 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. Now let's go through to see where each of these pieces is used in the process of photosynthesis. So let's start over here on the left-hand side with our light reactions, and these are the first steps in the overall process. So we start with the sunlight coming in and hitting the photosystems in that thylakoid membrane. Now these series are called the light reactions, and they're called the light reactions because they require sunlight. We also have some water added in to the reaction along with some electron carriers in the form of NADP+ and the low energy ADP. So these all go into the light reactions. At the end of the light reaction, we produce a little bit of oxygen. We also produce some ATP and some high energy NADPH. Now this NADP plus and ADP that got turned into the ATP and the NADPH are constantly cycled between the light reactions and the Kelvin cycle. So what's made in one is used in the next. However, we see the water, sunlight, and oxygen in our overall equation because those are things that are net added and net produced from the overall reaction. If we keep looking at the Kelvin cycle, which would be our second step, the Kelvin cycle starts with the ATP and the NADPH that are added in, and this is where the carbon dioxide is added to photosynthesis. After going around the Kelvin cycle through the light-independent reactions, this is where the plant finally produces glucose. So let's look at our overall equation and make sure we have accounted for everything. So we started with 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. Those were put in the second step. Our 6 molecules of water, those were added to the first step, and our sunlight was added to the first step. In the end, our glucose was produced in the second step, and the oxygen was produced in the first step. So all of our pieces of the overall chemical equation are accounted for in the diagram. Let's summarize this again to make sure that we know where each thing happens, what goes in, and what comes out. As you study for the tests and quizzes, these are the key pieces of information that you need to know. So starting with the light-dependent reactions, the locations of these are in the thylakoid. And if we look at what goes in, we have sunlight, we have water, and we have the NADP plus and the ADP. If we look at what comes out of the light reactions, we produce oxygen and we produce some ATP and the NADPH. Again, these energy carriers are going to be cycled between the light reactions and the light-independent reactions. So let's summarize the light-independent reactions on the other side of the paper. And remember, the light-independent reactions are also called the Kelvin cycle. Now again, the Kelvin cycle does not take place in the thylakoid, so it's not in those stacks of pancakes. Instead, the Kelvin cycle, this is in the stroma. And that stroma is the space inside of the chloroplast that surrounds the thylakoids. Now let's remember what goes in to the Kelvin cycle. Well, this would be the carbon dioxides coming in. And we also have the ATP and the NADPH that were produced in the light reactions coming into the Kelvin cycle. For the products of the Kelvin cycle, or the things that come out, we are producing glucose as the main product of photosynthesis, and we also produce more of those electron carriers, but they're in the low energy state that are headed back to the light reactions. So this would be the NADP plus and ADP. So I want you to double check your notes and make sure that your notes look like this image.